All right, folks. Whoops. How you doing today? Welcome to a joint presentation between LED and Statistics Division. In a moment, I'll have Jenny Hellrung introduce herself and say some nice words about what she does. Today, you're here because Bill Bellows is going to talk about this idea of the end of perfection and reflections on continuous improvement. And really, we talk about a lot of things like the right way to do stuff, and I think we're going to hear some stuff about how to proceed. What are some things that we can actually do? And looking forward to that. Just real quick, other methods of engagement. Feel free to join us on LinkedIn. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, which has the last 8 years of webinars posted on there every month, you'll see when we put new ones up. I'm getting ready to put up another one, a little behind. I'm going to be putting up March in the next day or so. But if you would like to see that, that was actually with me and Howard Zwick. We were talking about lean where you least expect it, personal lean habits at home, at work, and in the world. So I'll be putting these links into the chat. You'll take a look at that. Two other opportunities, my ASQ on LED, LED on my ASQ.
Hi. I'm Jenny Hellrung, and I'm the web coordinator for the Statistics Division of ASQ. And we also have lots of webinars going on, and you can reach us at my ASQ if you look for the Statistics Division. And we also have a LinkedIn page and a YouTube page where you can see some of the past webinars. And the Statistics Division is for everyone. It's not for statisticians alone. We do a lot of quality talks with very basic statistics and other quality and leadership type events. So don't let the title of the division scare you off.
All right, so the title is The End of Perfection, Reflections on Continuous Improvement. And my little bit of background, I worked in aerospace on the East Coast and the West Coast for 33 years in the jet engine business in Connecticut and in the rocket engine business in Los Angeles. And I retired from there. And so now I consult under the umbrella of In-Thinking Services. And I also do online courses, which get into extensive detail on what I'm presenting to you. I teach for Cal State Northridge and also Southern Utah University, both graduate and undergraduate courses. And I should also add, in between leaving aerospace and going off on my own, I worked for 2.5 years for the W. Edwards Deming Institute, a nonprofit founded by Dr. Deming in 1993. And so I had a great time there as well. All right, so there's my contact information. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And if there's anything you'd like to delve into more detail, then again, reach out to me. So I've broken the session up into these 5 categories, some language, and then look at Dr. Deming's classic red bead experiment, and then using that for a stepping off point to general topic of how organizations and individuals manage resources. That's time, money, energy, space, equipment, computers. And then show you one example that was cleared for public consumption of what we did at Rocketdyne. It's important if we're going to talk about perfection to have some sense of what does that word mean. And so one explanation is having all the required or desirable elements, qualities, or characteristics as good as it is possible to be. Also, I've seen definitions that include a sense of absolute, complete, making something completely free from faults or defects. And I found it very interesting that the word perfect shows up in the preamble of the Constitution, which is near the beginning of the Constitution. It's we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish a Constitution for the United States of America. So I just want to focus on the founding fathers had the same concept of perfection, of completion, and to avoid a sense of completion, spoke in terms of continual improvement, continuous improvement of the Constitution. And so I think it's important to appreciate that the word perfect, the understanding of perfect as being complete, is not a new thought. This goes back, and I'm sure it goes back many more hundreds of years before the Constitution. It's not form a perfect union. These are thoughts from a congressman in California. A more perfect union implies, he believes, that the progress of the American experience is never complete, right? Continuous improvement. The adjectives more coupled with perfect lead me, the congressman, to conclude that my task as a congressman is to seek to improve the state of our union while knowing that my efforts, indeed our collective efforts at any time, will be still imperfect. It will be left to those who follow to continue to fight to improve the union. So again, I just want to point out kind of the conflict between a sense of perfect being done and more perfect means there's room for improvement. What about continuous, marked by uninterrupted extension in space, time, or sequence? And this is a billboard for the Arrowhead Water. Better has no finish line. And then a focus there. Better is in our nature, they say. It's what we were born to be. So refresh with the water source from the only carefully selected 100% mountain springs. All right. Thoughts from Ralph Waldo Emerson on better. He says, if a man write a better book, preach a better sermon, or make a better mousetrap than his neighbor, though he build his house, I'm going to say mouse, build his house in the woods, the world will make a beaten path to his door. All right, so I'm going to get into the red bead experiment. So Dr. Deming, beginning in 82, 83 time frame, I believe he was interested, someone at Hewlett Packard turned him on to this, I believe. Anyway, but he would have willing workers from the audience come up. He would be the factory foreman. He had two bowls. And one bowl, if you can see, looks something like this with a bunch of beads. And he would pour the beads from one bowl into the other. And then use a scoop to put it in and then extract from this paddle 50 beads, and the objective to be to produce 100% white beads. That's the goal. But for those of you who have seen this before, you know that because the bowl includes red beads and white beads, you can't help but pull out white beads and red beads because the red beads are in there. So anyway, this Dr. Deming would have, again, take the four workers, or anyway, before 4 and 6 people from the audience, have them come up one at a time, walk over, pour the beads from one bowl into another, and then pour them back, and then put the paddle in, move it around a little bit with very strict instructions as to removing it at 45, I think it's actually 43 degrees. And if you follow these instructions to the letter, so he said as manager, then life should be good. So step one, mix the beads. So they're roughly 20% red. And these instructions come from the New Economics, Dr. Deming's last book, and it would explain you're gonna pour the beads from one into the other, and then you're gonna produce the beads. You're gonna put the paddle in, grasp it on the long side, and then you see outraise the paddle, axis horizontal, tilt 44 degrees. Every depression will contain a bead. You walk over to the inspector. The inspector, number one, counts the number of red beads. Goes to inspector number two. They count the number of red beads. And then the inspector general looks at those two numbers, and the number is recorded. That's step 4. And so again, the beads come in as a mix. you put the paddle in, that's the production process. You go to the inspector, you record the results. And if you go to the Deming Institute website and look on a page dedicated to the red beads, you can find some videos of this in far more detail. It takes about an hour or so to go through and have the four or five or six workers go through one at a time. I presented it myself at Bryce Canyon, the annual Bryce Canyon Society Deming Institute conference at Southern Utah University. Those were the four willing workers who each had an apron that said, "I am willing worker number 1, 2, 3, or 4." All of those aprons had quality slogans to motivate them. And in the new economics, where Dr. Deming would typically do it with 6 workers, not 4, but he shows these results for one experience. So the workers went through one at a time. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And then what you see Dr. Deming do is practice classic Western management. Maybe more than Western management. And he would highlight that, and berate Siri and Tim because they had 43 and 42 defects, red beads. And he would praise Larry and say, Larry's got his act together, but these others are just goofing. And then he would transition from making the conclusions by looking at the table. And you don't have to go far to find people looking at tables, looking at this year's data versus last year's data, whether it be rainfall or you name it. I mean, looking at 2 points in isolation is not a hard thing to find on the news, in the newspaper, or in meetings. So what Dr. Deming showed them, pulling away from Western management to what he was talking about, is what if we take this data and plot it as a run chart? Just look at the time ordered data. You see the average here. And this is not a statistics course. All right, so we're not going to get into gross detail, but I just want to point out there's this thing called variation in the number of red beads. And then Dr. Deming would go on and calculate the control limits. And then there's lessons of the red beads. And I do this in all of my courses. I have them go through, watch the videos with Dr. Deming or some others. And then we talk about, what are the lessons of the red bead? The lessons are that the willing workers are trying to do their best. The workers are trying to do a good job, even when they know they cannot. I mean, the red beads are in the mix. How can they not draw red beads? Another lesson is the need to understand variation. Why does it go up and why does it go down? Why is it not the same each time? There's a very statistics question. Also, the realization that the red beads are caused by the system, not the workers taken separately. And the workers are part of the system. But what Dr. Deming would talk about is the majority of the behavior of a system comes from the system. The majority of the variation you see in output is caused by the system. He would say, in the beginning is 85%, 95%, and then towards the end of his life, it was approaching 100%, not exactly 100, but he was going higher and higher, just trying to demonstrate that the majority of the performance variation comes from the system. And to blame the workers for the performance is to miss the system. And just like grades are not caused by the students taken separately. Grades are caused by the education system, which includes parents, teachers, principals, administrators. And yet, I'm willing to bet, all of us have plenty of experience taking exams and being given a grade, or better yet, performance appraisals at the end of the year, where our boss reminds us that our performance is separate from the system we're part of. Okay, so we're going to look at the implications of this. Well, what Dr. Deming's presenting in the red bead experiment is a closed system. I mean, it's this bowl, these beads, this paddle, these instructions. And I mean, there's no wind in the background, there's no earthquakes. And under that system, you would expect that the variation is going to be within the control limits. So if you go to some point today, look to the past, and you would expect in the future the data is going to fall within the control limits. So again, this is not, of course, statistical process control, but the role of the control limits is to remind us that if the data is outside the control limits, then that's an indication that the system is not closed, but there's something else going on. You know, again, a gust of wind or perhaps a change in suppliers. All right. So what do the red beads represent? This question I ask the students if I'm doing a live presentation, and people typically say they represent defects, you know, things that are not good, things the customer doesn't want. The customer wants white beads. So what are the red beads? Things that are deficient, imperfect. How do we eliminate the red beads? One way to eliminate the red beads is to buy from suppliers that don't deliver red beads. All right. Another way to eliminate red beads, and this happened at Bryce Canyon, is one of the workers put their hand in there and started to remove the red beads from the paddle and replace them with white beads one by one by one. And I caught him and I summarily fired him for that. But that's another way of eliminating red beads. What I want to turn the attention to is, what do the white beads represent? Okay. So I explained this to our daughter, who's a junior high school English teacher here in Los Angeles. And I said, Allison, I said, the red beads are cracked windows, a stapler which is broken, an overhead projector that doesn't work, a sound system that doesn't work, a computer that, you know, laptop, the kids have laptop computers, you know, in the classroom. These are red beads in the classroom, you know, a door that won't close. And as a result, she gets outside noise. And so we went through that. And I said, okay, Allison, if those are the red beads, what are the white beads in the classroom? And I said, well, the white beads are the white board that you're writing on, that you can write on it, you know, the markers that work, the stapler that works, the windows that open and close. So all the things that are good are the white beads, and all the problems are the red beads. So as an example of, you know, everyday use of red beads and white beads. Things that are bad, things that are good and going well are the white beads. Okay. So I want to get into resource management. Okay. So imagine, right? Again, this is and all these slides are slides I use with the graduate courses, and I'm used to having a live audience where I can just throw things out and get a response. So imagine what would happen within your organizations if, beginning at the opening of operations tomorrow, all processes produced 100% white beads and remained this way forever. So imagine you're able to achieve the ambitious goal of all white beads. And so it's fun to ask people, you know, wherever they work, what if beginning at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, you walked into work, and hour by hour, you begin to realize something's different. Okay. So then I would ask them, what changes would you imagine beginning to occur hour by hour, day by day, month by month, year by year, as the results became more and more apparent to everyone within the organization that there are no more red beads? So the first time I asked this question, I had in the room just a few people. One was a quality engineer. And his first response when I said, okay, Greg, what would it be like for you to experience this? His first response he says, I wouldn't have a job. I said, what do you mean? He says, my job on the Spatial Unmanned Engine program is dispositioning bad hardware, red beads. He said, if I came in tomorrow morning and everything was white, he said, I'd be out of a job. All right. Then I said, okay, you know, fast forward, you know, an hour later, at the end of the day, what are you going to see going on? And he came up with this list of, you know, all the positions that would no longer be needed in the organization if all the beads were white. So, and Dr. Deming's 14 points for management, again, which you can also find on the Deming Institute webpage. Point 5 of the 14 is to constantly improve constantly and forever the system of production and service to improve quality and productivity and thus constantly decrease costs. In doing so, Dr. Deming advocated for continual, meaning never-ending improvement, resulting in what is commonly referred to as faster, better, and cheaper products and services. All right. So, with consideration of Dr. Deming's red bead experiment, is the achievement of 0 red beads everywhere within an organization synonymous with the accomplishment of what quality management advocates mean by perfection? And so when I asked that question, again, I don't want to create confusion over having Manny mute and unmute. You can send in text to Manny that I can see later. But I've had audiences live with hundreds of people in the room walking around and just ask them, is the premise of Dr. Deming's talk about continuous improvement that the objective of the Deming philosophy is to achieve 100% white beads, 0 red beads, 0 defects everywhere within the organization? And if we achieve that goal, are we done? Are we done? And if we are done, then what does that say about continuous improvement? Then people will say, oh, Bill, we can make the white beads faster. And I say, okay, we can make them faster. We can make them cheaper. Okay, we can do cheaper. I understand that. But relative to the quality of the white beads, can we improve the quality once we achieve 100% white beads? And I find this a fascinating question to ask people. And they'll keep coming back to, yeah, everything can be improved. And I'll say, okay, faster, cheaper, everything can be improved. And I say, okay, how do you improve the quality of the beads once you achieve 100% white beads? And then people will say, well, you can build a better mousetrap. I said, no, those white beads in this bowl, right? So here I am holding up, right? These white beads. Can these white beads be improved, those white beads, once we achieve 100% white? And this is where I find people get stuck. They're incredibly stuck on they're stuck in a quality system that views beads as being white or red. And they believe 100% white beads is the goal, and that is one semblance of this thing called perfection. And what I want to explore is what happens when you get past that obstacle, because that thinking is in our head. All right. So again, if 100%, what would Dr. Deming mean by continual improvement? If no, continual improvement means, does continual improvement of quality end? Again, I've had audiences of several hundred people, and they keep coming back with faster and cheaper. And I say, okay, faster and cheaper, yes. Tell me what better means. And they're stuck, absolutely stuck. Everywhere I go, they get stuck. Very, very common. And what we're going to explore in the rest of the presentation is why we get stuck and what happens when you become unstuck. All right, now we're going to get into resource management. So we went bowling as a family. My wife and I have 2 kids. Again, I mentioned our daughter is a junior high school teacher and our son lives with us at home. And so when they were both in high school, they were on the swim team, and every year there'd be a bowl-a-thon with the swim team on a Saturday night. And one of the first years, we got back home and walked down to the end of the hallway, and inside that bag is my wife's bowling ball, right? And I saw the bowling ball there at the entrance of the master bedroom, and I said, okay, why is the bowling ball there? And she said, ask Wilson. So again, Wilson was about 13 at the time. So I turned to Wilson and I said, Wilson, why is the bowling ball there? And his response was, Mom said, put it in the bedroom. Well, let's think about that. All right, so let's draw that line across the entrance of the doorway. what I ask my students is, or again, if it was a live presentation, I'd say, okay, so is that a red bead or a white bead? Is the placement of that bowling ball a red bead or a white bead? It's a white bead. Why is it a white bead? Because Wilson met the requirements. The bowling ball is inside the doorway. White, white, white. If it was in the hallway on the other side of that line, then it would be a red bead. Right? Again, we're acknowledging there's variation in the placement, but these are all this is good. This is a task completed. All right. Now let's look at inspiration from what we learned while I was at Rocketdyne from Ford and Toyota. So in the late 1960s, Frank Pipp, an assembly plant manager for an American automobile company, Ford, had his team purchase competitors' cars. His plan was to have the final assembly team disassemble competitors' products and learn how they assembled. At that time, if two connecting parts within Ford could be assembled without the use of a rubber mallet to bang them together, then those two parts were known as snap fit. In Pip's experience, snap fit was a rare occurrence. To his amazement, one competitor's car that they bought and took apart was 100% snap fit. And what Pip did, he was so astounded by the results, he had them take the product apart twice, assemble it twice. They never used a mallet. When he called someone out from Ford's corporate headquarters, the Ford executive said, right, that's the Ford division GM said, the customer will never notice this difference. Slowly but surely, customers have noticed the assembly and performance results that Pip's team found in 1969 when they first examined and assembled and disassembled and assembled a Toyota pickup truck. So what I love about Toyota is this idea that they back in the 60s were selling products that assembled without mallets. Think of what that means in assembly operations in terms of ergonomics improvements, that you don't have to bang these things together. I know banging things together is a very common occurrence in places I've worked, and I don't have to go far to find it being done elsewhere. All right. So with that inspiration, I'm going to show you what we did at Rocketdyne 20 some years ago, and we discovered something about white beads that I don't think many people have figured out. All right. So this application has to do with the R68 engine, which went into production in the mid 90s. Sorry, it is nearing the end of its life as being produced. It's this engine is used to launch very heavy payloads for the military, mostly billion-dollar plus spy satellites. Anyway, the engine has a main combustion chamber right in there. And in the main combustion chamber, there's a plate roughly 30 inches in diameter, half an inch to an inch thick. I can't give the details other than say it's a flat plate, 30 inches in diameter. The plate has 628 holes. And in each hole goes a tube. And through those tubes flow a liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. They are separated so that actually the tube is a tube within a tube, which is pretty cool. And then downstream, where they mix on the bottom of this plate, they mix and combustion takes place, and then the flames come out, and then you get thrust. Well, the fabrication process that the designers had in mind, the ideal way to make this is to take a thin piece of braze foil and place it between the tube and the hole in each of these joints. And then you put it in the furnace, you pay the meter man $15,000 for one braze cycle. And ideally you get a fillet, right? Just a round wick of braze on the top and bottom. And you have to have a solid joint here, because if you don't have a solid joint, then bad things happen. The liquid oxygen and hydrogen leak through here, and that's a bad day for the engine and the vehicle. And so they had in mind the easiest way to do this is tubes and holes. You put it all together, put the braze foil in, you get a nice fillet, $15,000 per cycle. The problem was experience showed that of the 1,256 fillets, again, 628 times 2, experience showed that the best we can ever do is 50 to 85% of the fillets in one cycle. So that means we're going to have to do it, we're going to have to braise it 2 or 3 times if it can be braised again. So this design was thrown out by the experts who said you can't go this way. One, we don't know if we can braise that material a second time. Two is think of all the costs. So they were looking at throwing this concept away, which was the cheapest production concept, and replacing it with far more expensive designs. But they didn't have to go that way. They were smarter than that. So pre-1996, what happens? The hole has a diameter requirement, right? And the world of quality, there's a min and a max. And what did we find? We found that the holes tended to be produced by the manufacturing folks as small as possible. Okay. What else did we find? We found when we looked at the outer diameters of the tubes, there was a final grinding operation, and they were produced to the high side of the tolerance, right? So in both cases, all of these are within requirements, and these requirements are incredibly tight, right? But what we found was the holes tended to be as small as possible, like bowling ball and doorway. The outer diameters on the high side, think bowling ball and doorway on that, leading to the question, which of these two people, the hole people or the post people, which of them own the gap? Which of them is thinking about the gap that the braze foil goes into? And what we found, it's not rocket science, neither one of them are focusing on the gap. The hole people focus on the hole, the post people focus on the outer diameter. And then what about the gap? The gap is an afterthought, right? And so this goes back to, what do we do? Everything is good. Everything is good. All the beads are white. Well, what you're seeing here is everything within spec is white beads. Everything within spec is white. What we started to focus on was, what is the ideal gap that the braze foil wants? And so experiments were run to find out the ideal gap, right? When we think of ideal gap, let me just flip over to an analogy. In the world of baseball, it's balls and strikes. And so what you're seeing in hole diameters is, in the world of quality at Rocketdyne, it's within the strike zone as a strike, as a white bead, and outside is bad, that's red. And so the quality system there was balls and strikes, balls and strikes. And just like professional pitchers, they start paying attention to where in the strike zone do you want the ball thrown that the batter can't get it. When we started to think that way and started to realize that the white beads have variation, and we start to think about, how do we change these distributions to get the gap that we want? So instead of the gap being an afterthought, the gap became the primary focus. And we went off and ran experiments, found out what the ideal gap was, and then went off and got the whole people to focus on achieving a distribution that had to match the outer diameters on the tubes. So the big deal achievement was focusing on the gap between the tubes and the holes. And with that accomplished, every single one of these that was ever produced, and I'm often reminded, with one exception, where the wrong braze alloy was used, I believe. Every single one of these production units achieved 100% first-time braze success, unheard of. But what I want to throw out is, when I present this in audiences, again, around the world with my college classes where I have people work in aerospace, they've never heard of anything like this strategy, which at Rocketdyne we started calling the difference between minding the parts, to borrow from the London Underground, or minding gaps. And we started to enact the vocabulary of when we should mind parts and when we should mind gaps, and be aware of that difference. right? And now let me give some closing thoughts. And so the big deal that Dr. Deming was trying to show is that systems are not open, or not closed, they're open. There's things going on out there outside of our control, and the role of the control charts is to use them to monitor things from outside our purview coming in, supplier changes and whatnot. Right? But the same system could be used, and what we did at Rocketdyne, instead of monitoring the red bead variation, let me get back to that, we actually monitored the white bead variation. So one of the big clues, points I want to share with you is you can stop thinking, if you think about perfection, you're thinking that all the beads that are white are the same. Going beyond perfection, shattering this illusion of perfection, is when you begin to realize that all the balls in the strike zone are actually in different locations. I mean, so major league pitchers are not focusing on perfection being throwing nothing but balls within the strike zone. They're very particular about where in the strike zone they hit. So you could say the same thing about tennis players. It's not just hit the ball on the other side of the court, but it's having it hit a specific location. And so I use those in courses as everyday examples that in the world of professional sports, zero defects wouldn't get you into the ring. You have to be able to think well beyond that. And in my courses and in my consulting, I try to get across to clients is we have to do the same thing in a work environment. We have to think beyond zero defects and begin to imagine that there's variation in the white beads, right? And so last thing I want to say is if you look in Dr. Deming's last book, The New Economics, he says the prevailing style of management must undergo transformation. The prevailing style of management is about red beads and white beads and blaming willing workers for the red beads. All right, Dr. Deming is saying the system cannot understand itself. Transformation requires a view from the outside. The aim of this chapter, the aim of this preview is to provide an outside view that Dr. Deming called the system of profound knowledge. He says the system of profound knowledge provides a lens, and this is the majority of my work at Rocketdyne, was helping people see past black and white thinking into the world of shades of gray, understanding gaps in relationships and not parts taken separately. And then Dr. Deming said, once the individual understands this, he can apply its principles in every kind of relationship. He'll have a basis for judging his decisions and for transforming the organizations he belongs to. Again, that was part of our effort at Rocketdyne, was to instill day by day for over 20 years what this would mean to how we operate. And then the last thing I want to show is the layout of profound knowledge per Dr. Deming is in 4 parts related to each other as a system. So one is appreciation of the system, the idea that all performance is caused by the system, not things individually. Knowledge about variation. Not only is there variation in the red beads, there's also variation in the white beads. And then you understand that the variation and the impact of the variation in the tubes and the holes shows up where? When you're trying to braze them together. The theory of knowledge gets us into all we know is what we know, and the idea of, from Dr. Deming, of developing theories as to how do we continually improve. The psychology factor, which is, you know, that people stuff. Spend a lot of time on that. All right. So I just want to close with imagine the possibilities in the world which could be created, working, investing, designing, building, learning, thinking, and leading together. And so with that, we can open it up to your questions. And Manny, do you have questions that you sorted through, or how do you want to handle the questions?
Oh, Bill, I have lots of questions.
All right.
If you're talking about from the participants,
Yeah.
not so many. We've got time for those, but I personally have plenty of questions. Before we do get started with that, I do want to point out, folks, that if you haven't been paying attention to the chat, you probably should. Not only has there been a little mini drama playing out there with regard to red beads being found everywhere, There's a lot of good information. All the links that I had for the webinars and
Oh, fantastic.
connect on LinkedIn, it's all there. Bill, I think about the only thing I didn't put in there was your LinkedIn URL, which
Oh,
I'll
sure.
find and post if you want, no problem.
Yeah, go right ahead. Go right ahead. Yeah. This is not a 16-week course at Southern Utah University or an 8-week course at Cal State Northridge. This is just a brief overview. And but I just wanted to know that we applied it to rocket engines. I can only share with you a few things we did. The rest is highly proprietary. But this has applications well beyond putting hardware together.
I mean, I think it's really neat, Bill, just some of the things that you showed, because I'll tell you what, some people might know. I mean, I've been doing this for a little while. I see a lot of things, and I was really about 4 slides in to your presentation. I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting ready to learn some things." So it was a lot of fun. I certainly enjoyed that, and I do appreciate it. And I think I have to say, you did open my eyes about this idea of love the bowling ball bag right inside the door. Hey, it meets the spec, right? It's it does what the mother asked for. So
Well, I've had people in big corporations tell me when they try to make the holes more than minimum, when they try to put this into practice and start to focus on the ideal diameter of the hole and the ideal outer diameter, he said they are told by their coworkers that it doesn't add value to make the hole any larger. And I thought, yeah, well, the people who say it doesn't add value are the people that are looking at the whole in isolation. And of course it doesn't add value if you look at the whole, but if you look at the assembly process, it might add value. And so I throw that out because I think a lot of the talk about do things add value or not don't add value. And what they're doing is reminding us of a focus on minding the part and not the gap. When you start minding gaps, all this talk about things not adding value go out the window.
yeah, it's funny about adding value. If I can throw something out there, a lot of times, like for instance, when we're talking about from the perspective of someone checking into a hotel, right? I mean, really, housekeeping is it value added or not? Okay.
Exactly.
Certainly they're willing to pay for it, but we could argue that it's just set up for the room. So the value, it really depends on who's looking at it. And certainly I don't ever want to tell a housekeeper that, well, yeah, your job's non-value added or it's required non-value added. I mean, you can't do that.
Well, that's the other thing, Manny. Think of this psychology thing. When you start getting into this aspect of whose work adds value, what Dr. Deming would say is you can measure the cost of having your staff take a seminar. I mean, you could say, they're in there for 2 days and I'm paying them X hours, right? That's not looking at what's it cost for them to be there and not doing their job, not answering the phone. Forget it, but that makes it more complicated. But Deming would say you could measure the cost of the training, but you cannot measure the value. The value shows up in the future, right? So for people that read to their kids when they're young, can they measure the value? No. Why are they doing it? Because they believe the value is more than the cost. And so then I think so much of what we do in our personal lives is based on a sense of I'm willing to spend this time because I believe the value of this webinar will be more than the time spent here. And so when people start getting into these conversations about this doesn't add value, that doesn't add value, again, I think those conversations are very narrow. And if we want, and I think the same people that talk about don't add value are the same people who are focused on achieving perfection. And then I'd say Clayton Kershaw didn't get to be a great pitcher for the Dodgers by just focusing on getting the ball anywhere in the strike zone. So if you want to
Sure.
stay in the minor leagues or not get into professional baseball, then focus on balls and strikes. But if you want to become a professional in the world of quality improvement, I think you have to start thinking about where's the ball in the strike zone.
Well, I like that, the part that some pieces, maybe a corner of the plate's more effective than others. By the way, Bill, just sort of completely off topic, I just want to say it out loud. I got bookcase envy. Okay. I'm looking
Ah!
at your bookcase, I'm looking at mine, and suddenly I'm feeling a little inadequate. So anyway, you've given me something to aspire for. So
There.
we do have is a question or a comment. So um, are the four elements of the system of profound knowledge separate or are they interdependent?
Interdependent, which is why it's called the system of profound knowledge. Interdependent. Again, the idea is if we're blaming workers, if I blame you, Manny, for producing red beads, will you be inspired at all to think about how to improve the process using your theory of knowledge about, I wonder if I change the paddle, I wonder if I do this? Does that inspire you to improve? No. Right? All right. If I berate you for producing red beads, is that going to create curiosity within Manny over why is there variation in the red beads, knowledge about variation? Absolutely not.
Right. In fact, you know what? I'm going to see Bill coming down the aisle and I'm going to like go be busy somewhere else. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
So the idea is that if we, business as usual, what Dr. Deming called revealing system of management, treats workers as interchangeable parts, don't produce red beads. I tie your hands behind your back and continue to work with suppliers to get low cost beads, which include red beads. And then I blame you, Manny, for producing red beads, right? Or what if I incentivize the quarterback, to throw the ball as fast as possible, but don't give the wide receiver any time to catch the ball? Or again, I could create an incredible incentive system that makes it really hard to mind the gap.
Oh, Bill, we could talk about purchasing agents who get rewarded for reducing acquisition cost per piece. Forget the
Yep.
fact that they got to rent a trailer or two out back to store the stuff or all the cost associated with that.
Yep.
It should be total cost of ownership, right? Not just
Well,
acquisition.
I tell you a story again from a big aerospace company that you've all heard of, and the manager came in one day and was incentivizing them to all work faster. So their very one operation was machining these holes, and then deep and the process included deburring the hole for what would go into the hole with the next stage, the next stage, the next stage. And so the manager comes in one day, incentivizing them all to go faster. And the very first guy who machined the holes, in order to go faster, he did a bare minimum deburring operation, bare minimum, which then made it harder for the others to use the holes. Well, guess who got the award? And the sad news is the amount of time the first person saved was lost by the others. Now, if they machine the hole and deburred the holes barely, but never used the holes, then it would have been a great idea.
Right.
But the sad news is because those holes were part of a system, it actually made things worse. And I could tell stories for days on these types of behaviors that are alive and well today.
Oh, yeah. Most people don't really think about sub-optimization. I make something more convenient for me, perhaps, and forget what other people do. Or the other one that I hate, that drives me crazy, is I've watched people waste a lot of time doing things that they think will help the next person downstream. And then it's wasted effort, or worse, it has to be reworked.
Yeah, Yeah.
I mean, it's
That's where the
great.
mallets come from, man. That's where the mallets are used, right? We're banging things together.
Yeah.
And then I've talked to people in final assembly operations that are using mallets, and I say, again, think, you know, putting parts together and they're not quite fitting, and I say, well, can you go talk to people who make these parts? Turbine blades that won't fit on the turbine wheel. And he says, well, I can't go talk with him. I said, why not? He says, because all he's going to tell me is that all the turbine blades met requirements. But they met requirements on the low side of the requirements. And the other part was on the high side. And that's why he can't quite get them together. And I said, call up the supplier. And he says, there's no reason for a phone call. He said, they'll just tell me they're all good.
Sure. Oh yeah. Hey, by the way, Bill, you might want to check chat out. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. There's some things that probably could be very well addressed by you. They're not simple yes, no questions. They require a little nuance. So while you're reading that, trying to figure out what you're going to talk about, I will point out one more time, folks. Earlier in the chat, I put in all the links for some of the everything we've talked about. I've seen that Jenny's been doing the same thing too on behalf of the statistics division. So be sure you do take a look at those. If you missed something, let me know. I did chat my email address out there at one point, and
Manny, is there?
yes.
I know we're running short on time. Is there? Can you capture those chats and send them to me?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And they'll have the names, so as long as you can
Yes.
figure out who they are, I think it'll be okay.
Well, one is I'll just say, one is I appreciate Manny the invite to be with you, and then for Steve and Jenny, your help as well. And I know there were some others from ASQ headquarters who arranged to get us a great audience. And again, I would welcome the opportunity to meet offline with any of you. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. We get enough people, we could have a separate session to get into far more detail. And this is how I learn. And I can share with you more. I can also, what I'll do, Mandy, I'll send you a couple articles that actually, what I'll do is I'll send you a link to blogs I've written for the Deming Institute.
There you go.
And
That makes
more
more
detail.
sense.
There's videos online with a lot more detail.
Great. Okay. By the way, while you are looking at that and for that, just so you know, I did chat out your LinkedIn profile too. So,
Okay.
if you get some minor activity, don't be surprised. So, um,
Relative to comment from Randy Klein, that's why CPKs are so important. No, Randy, CPKs are lousy. CPKs are dangerous. I spent years at Rocketdyne having people get rid of CPKs. Absolutely. And then, Randy, if you want more detail, reach out to me. CPKs, I did all I could within Rocketdyne to kill the use of CPKs. That's another way of focusing on parts and isolation. And did I make my feelings on CPKs clear?
well, I'm not sure. You know what? Anybody who's interested to hear more can stay on after everyone else leaves. So,
Again,
if you have any closing words, Bill, we are getting to that point where we're at the top of the hour and we're gonna have to do something like leave. So,
no, again, these are great questions. If not CPKs, again, reach out to me. I'll show you simple ways to do it. But just think, having the bowling ball uniformly in the doorway is an incredible CPK, but it's not what I want. Right? The idea is not what's CPKs measure what's good for you, not what's good for the system. And so, yeah, no, I just say is there's a lot more to this. Again, this is not intended to be a 16-week course and a lot of detail, but I would welcome the opportunity to get a separate session offline. And Manny, thanks again. Jenny, thanks again. Steve, thanks again. And all of you joining in. Old friends and new friends, thanks for joining in. And it's been fun.
I just
Hey,
wanted to
really-
say that was a great hour. So thanks, Bill.
Hey, Jenny. Great to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. On behalf of LED and everyone who's here today, I'd like to say thanks so much. Really did enjoy the conversation about systems. And for anybody who did miss this, feel free to join our YouTube channel, and you'll get notified the 1 or 2 times a month we put up a new webinar. Always great content, and then you don't have to worry about missing out. Folks, certainly you've got a lot of ways to spend your continuing education time. We appreciate you spending the last hour or so with us. So safe travels if you're heading anywhere, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bill, Jenny, any final words?
Yeah, again, there's nothing but thanks on my end.
All right.
Same here. That
Folks.
was fun.
Enjoy. Take care. You should see your RUs. If not, I'll see some emails in my inbox, I'm sure.